Hello, and welcome to a book or two to review 34. 34. And it is Monday, the 18th of October, and it's the Battle of Quiberon Bay. 1759, Hawke and the Defeat of the French by Nicholas Tracy. Now, I have covered this in episode 57 of Brewships. But it is a gorgeous book. And frankly, it needs to be seen. It is really lovely done. I would have maybe liked the maps to appear in colour, but that is a publishing decision, which I can understand because having learnt the cost differentials with my own book when they were looking at them, I can understand why, and it's a real big thing. If you do want to put in colour, it's going to add to the price. It's going to add to a lot of things for them to produce it, especially when they produce something which they're trying to produce in the quality of this work. It is a really beautiful book. It's £20. So using the usual conversion in my head, which to give a rough dollar estimate, because usually it's about 75 pence to the dollar, roughly. It goes up and down, but that's the rough estimate I tend to use. Then that would mean it's roughly $28. Roughly, he says. This is an absolutely wonderful read. I mean, this has been so well put together and so well thought through. I cannot recommend Nicholas Tracy enough. I currently don't have any other books by them. I'm not sure if they've produced any other books. But seeing as they're a adjunct professor of history at the University of New Brunswick, I'm presuming that they do, including Who's Who in Nelson's Navy and Nelson's Battles, the Triumph of British Sea Power, apparently. I will be tracking those books down, because if they are anything even remotely close to this one in terms of quality, they are very much worth a read. It starts off with setting the scene on the inside of the front cover. Revered naval theorist Alfred Thayer Mahan thought the Battle of Quiberon Bay, 20th of November 1759, was as significant as Nelson's victory at Trafalgar in 1805. I'd agree with Mahan there. Arguably, it was even more vital. Britain in 1759 was much less well defended, and the threat of French invasion was both more realistic and more imminent. When the British fleet under Admiral Hawke fell upon them, the French ships of the line under Admiral Conflans were actually on their way to rendezvous with the invasion troop ships gathered at the mouth of the Loire. Yet the battle and the admiral remain relatively obscure. There is no Quiberon Square or Hawke's Column. The battle itself was fought in terrible weather, with the French attempting to exploit their local knowledge by heading for Quiberon Bay, and assuming that the British would not follow them amongst its treacherous shoals in such conditions. Hawke, however, pursued them under full sail and won a daring victory in the finest tradition of the Royal Navy. The invasion was thwarted. Professor Nicholas Tracy not only gives a detailed reconsideration of the events leading up to the battle and the engagement itself, but places great emphasis upon its wider strategic significance, particularly in relation to the war for North America. And there is no question for which chapter I should take you to. There are lots of good chapters in this book. As I explained, I like the way it's laid out. It starts off with a context chapter, which gives you what's going on at the time. Britain's naval strategy is the next chapter. Then Admiral Sir Edward Hawke, then Hawke in command, then Watch on Brest, and the Battle of Quiberon and victory, an armed peace and an empire lost. All these are excellent chapters, and it's an excellent order. For someone coming to this, if you don't have any prior knowledge, this book will be fine for you to come to. This book will be great for you to come to. If you don't know anything about Quiberon Bay and you're interested in the middle of the Second Hundred Years' War, if you're interested in those conflicts going on, this is an excellent one. But as such, I'm going to take you straight to Chapter 6, the Battle of Quiberon Bay. Leclerc's defeat at Lagos had no direct effect on the French plans, because Conflans was not expecting the Toulon ships to be added to his fleet, but there was a concern that Boscawen's squadron would join the British Channel Fleet. Even though, in the end, they were sent into harbour and put into the dockyard hands, their arrival in home waters did reduce the already slender chance of Conflans being able to escort the landing craft from Le Havre to Ostend and then to Melbourne. With the advantage of retrospect, it's clear that the odds were so strongly against successfully carrying out the planned invasion that it should have been cancelled. Conflans was informed that ships sheltering in Cadiz under the command of their senior captain, de Castellon, were given orders to head to an Atlantic port when they could, but in fact, they were not to escape Broderick's blockade until January 1760, when they successfully returned to Toulon. But cancellation of the operation would have been devastating the French credit. Yes, you have to carry out a military operation because otherwise your economy will be completely consumed because you will run out of credit. Believe it or not, and you might not like that, what I'm about to say, but that's not exactly a thing which is confined to the past. Operations sometimes continue because of national status and even because of the national economy. Long past the point at which it's sensible to risk those lives. But cancellation of the operation would have been devastating to the French credit and have ended all hope of diverting British potential from America and India. Even an unsuccessful or incomplete invasion effort could provide relief for the French and the Canadian army at Montreal. Consequently, Duc d'Aiguillon had been sent his final orders on the 5th of September, a modification of Plan C that put him at liberty to effect a landing on either side of Scotland, or if that had proved impossible, to land in Ireland. He had wanted to limit the close escort of the Scottish invasion force to 6 ships under Moreugh's command, with Conflans' reduced force bulked out with merchantmen and as many frigates as could be found, trailed its coast of the Breton coast to draw off the British Channel Fleet. Louis XV's sailing orders prepared on 20th of August made that arrangement, but Conflans later persuaded Berryer not to divide the already inadequate force under his command. Tasked it was with escorting the main invasion fleet from Flanders to Malden. In the middle of October, he received his orders to attempt to fight his way out of Brest, and then to proceed to Quiberon Bay to collect the transports, which he was to see safely on their way. If he then decided to return himself to Brest, he was to detach 6 ships to escort the invasion force. Je vous prescrirai second de non pondre de ver que le point principal de tout nos opérations présentes doit être la plus grande sûreté de la fraude de Mohaben. My French is terrible. Please note, I do my best. His first duty was to ensure the safety of the invasion force. Before he actually put to sea, Conflans informed d'Aiguillon and Berryer that he intended to avoid combat with Hawke and concentrate on the dealing with the cruisers in Quiberon Bay. On the 15th of October, the Franco-Irish smuggler Thoreau managed to escape from Dunkirk in Le Michel Belle-Île of 48 guns, with 4 privateer frigates and 2 smaller craft. Embarked were 1,370 volunteer drafts from regular regiments, commanded by Le Comte de Cassel. Evading the pursuit of Commodore Boys, Thoreau sailed north to Gothenburg and Bergen before rounding Scotland. With only 3 of his original 5 frigates, he arrived on 21st of February 1760 at Carrickfergus on the north side of Belfast Lough and put the soldiers ashore, where they attacked and defeated the garrison at a cost of 50 men. The remonstrances of the English ministry had operated so little on the administration in Ireland, commented Horace Walpole in Memoirs of King George II, that Carrickfergus, though seated in the heart of the Protestant interests, where arms might securely have been trusted, was found by Thoreau totally unguarded and unprovided. Not quite, but according to Walpole, the garrison was only 72 men, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Jennings, a man formed for a hero, but he had great bravery and a small portion of sense. Once out of ammunition, the garrison was reduced to throwing bricks worked out of the walls. 4 months after the French defeat in Quiberon Bay, this effort was no longer a useful diversion. After getting provisions and fresh water on board, which Walpole says was Thoreau's main objective, the troops were re-embarked on Tuesday, the 26th of February. They were intercepted on their way back to France by a squadron of 3 frigates commanded by Captain Elliot in HMS Ilias, and all were captured. The guns of the Royal Navy wreaked havoc in the privateers, crowned as soldiers, and for a cost of 4 British dead and 15 injured, the French lost 300, including Captain Fro killed. Several dreadful songs, including one in Manx and another recorded by John Wesley, were written to commemorate the Battle of Ramsey. This disappointing outcome, however, could not be anticipated at Versailles and did not influence the French master plan. Versailles. The problem for Conflans was overwhelming. Due to the British sweep of the French regiment before the declaration of war in 1755, the typhus epidemic, captures during the war, and the failure to pay those sailors who were inscripted into naval service and who in consequence found ways to desert, in May 1759, complements at Brest were short 3,500 petty officers and able seamen. Ouch. Complements of Brest ships were necessarily filled with untrained sailors and the Brittany Coast Guard troops. 2 days before the arrival of Bompart's squadron, on 5th November, a small squadron, including the French Achille, 64 guns, and Achille, 64 guns, and 2 frigates, who had been cruising in the South Atlantic under the command of Monsieur de la Marinière, had managed to get into Brest. The seasoned sailors from the 2 weather-worn squadrons were offered a bonus to transfer into the ships of the Brest fleet. Nevertheless, Chef d'Escadre, Gilbert, had so few seamen on board his flagship that he was only able to work Orient through the Gula on leaving Brest by making his officers handle the sails. The final muster of the Brest fleet was 7,100 professional seamen, 1,500 Marines, 1,700 soldiers, and 2,700 Coast Guards. That suggests not a lot of those professional seamen were professional seamen if you had to have your officers working your own sails. Lieutenant Thompson was to characterize the French officers as rendered incapable by seasickness after a long wait safely in harbour. When writing about Captain Keppel's difficulties blockading Brest in 1761, Sir Julian Corbett was to express the view that they had proved, as was to be shown so often in the future, how weak a form of war is a prolonged close blockade. How the wear and tear in ships and consequent loss of speed and endurance inevitably gives the enemy his chance sooner or later. For permanent command, it must always be doubtful whether it can compare with an open blockade conducted from a good interior position by a fleet that can retain its speed and fitness for action, without the demoralization of absolute inactivity. But Corbett was at the time preoccupied with the question of deployment of the Grand Fleet should war occur with Germany, and his mind was already on the limitations of steam-powered dreadnought and pre-dreadnought battleships. Hawke had managed to keep his ships reasonably clean by rotating them into harbour, and his crews, though worn by incessant labour, had become highly effective at sailing, deck, and gunnery drill in all weather. Conflans' crews could not compare with them. And even if they had been able to, it is never satisfactory to work up ships with new crews while actually engaged in operations. Although Brest Roads is spacious, the training Conflans could give his crews without taking them out to sea was limited. And what was true before the mast was also true on the quarterdeck. Moroges was not alone in noting the pessimism amongst senior naval officers. When Conflans sailed on the 14th of November, he was 200 miles ahead of Hawke and had only 120 miles to go to bring Duff's command of frigates into a very unequal action. But Conflans was unlucky, and his winds, which now headed him sometimes strongly, and his inexperienced crews were not skillful at beating. Because of the limitations, he did not risk the shorter route into the bay through the Ras de Seine, and stood south and west until he cleared the shoals and islands, extending from the Ile de Sens. On the 15th of November, he was only about 30 miles from Belle Isle, but it was to take until dawn on the 20th of November before he brought his enemy into sight, and then he had to face the full power of the British Channel Fleet. He was to be censured by French historians for his slow progress, but Corbett was doubtful whether the accusation is just. Hawke, with all his skill as a seaman and his highly trained and homogeneous fleet, had been able to do little better, but being well to the northward of his destination, the northerly winds had lost him nothing, and he had been able to gain a day on his adversary. The Battle of Quiberon Bay is full of little details. There are ships which literally seem to, as far as the French are concerned, magically appear The waves are so big, the ship's so tiny in comparison. They are literally swept over rocks, which should wreck them, and come about and go, ah, they're a French there. We all engage. It is a battle full of all the actions which you would associate with Nelsonic Band of Brothers idea. The idea of these officers and sailors working together for the prize. And the prize was capturing a French ship. Let's be honest. We talk about war and the various things and the strategic prize. That's the thing for the nation. How did the Royal Navy keep those sailors motivated? How do they keep them wanting the way they could, what they could do, and keep them employed when it was a very hard life and they were having to go at sea a lot of time? Well, for starters, they were paid slightly more regularly than their French counterparts and fed fairly well because they made sure they were. But most importantly, it was the eyes on the prize. The prize money you could earn could set you up for life. Officers and men alike could earn a huge amount from capturing a prize. And the thing is, this is why frigate service was often more popular than ships of the line, despite the ships of the line employing more. Because a frigate would capture many prizes. For a third, second, or first rate, well, the likelihood of them getting a prize was when there's a major battle. And if the enemy don't come out, then there's not going to be a major battle. So when the battles come in, this is when the battles do come in, and you get the chance to capture a third rate, a second rate, or a first rate. That is a lot of money. If that is captured and brought into service with the Royal Navy, that is a lot of money for the crew, for the officers, at all levels involved. Often, after a fight, if the crew had captured an enemy ship, they'd be almost as concerned as repairing that as repairing their own ship. The reason why? Because the better state of repair it's brought back in, the higher price they get for the prize. And that money was useful. It could be life changing. If we think today at various professions in the world which are dangerous, they often rely on bonuses, on high pay, on bounties for continuing service, all sorts of things. It's the same in the 18th century. It's the same in the early 19th century and 1800s. The Royal Navy is no different to any modern employer in that regard. And the people working for them are no different than people today. They're willing to take great risks if they can get great reward. They're willing to risk their lives. They're willing to put up with the deprivations of service, with the loss of personal freedom, with the hardship of the work, because of the potential reward. Yes, there are other advantages to a naval life. And there are a lot more other disadvantages as well, which have been mentioned. But the fact is, prizes, and like those gathered at Quiberon Bay, they can make a big difference in your life. And yes, we do know the majority of the people, it doesn't always make that big a difference to, because they squander their money, like, again, the majority of people do today. You get a lot of money, you think about it, if you win some money, what do you do with it? Sometimes you save it. It's more easier to save today than it was then. There are more reputable and reliable banks. You don't store it in your chest. But sometimes we don't. And yes, before anyone comments, officers did make a lot more money than sailors did when they captured a ship. But And this is going to sound terrible. In the term, at the time, the officers have the more responsibility. So, we can say it as, oh, they probably shouldn't, because, you know, they're all taking the same risk. That's true. But if the capturing of a ship goes wrong, if the fight goes wrong, it's the captain and the officers which could get court-martialed over it, not the sailors. And with responsibility tends to come greater responsibility tends to come greater pay. And there were options where sailors got bonuses for their parts and actions as well in capturing ships. And things tend to be looked at. Things tend to be more complex than just a simple straight down analysis. Nuance, context, all have bearing. But the fact is, Quiberon Bay and this book and a lot of what the fleet accomplishes at this point, and in many other battles, is motivated. Our crew is motivated by three things. One, it's their job. They're there. If they do it well, they have more of a chance of surviving. And they've chosen and they've got involved in that job for some reason. Two, occasionally they just don't like the opponents. But they do like their mates. They usually have friends. And again, if they do their job well, their friends might well live. And they and their friends might, well, live longer. And that's always a good thing. It tends to keep you going. And three, hope for future. That's the thing. Prize money, getting a big prize and getting the money from it, that gives you could give you the possibility of a future beyond naval service. Perhaps a comfortable retirement. Perhaps setting up a pub or an inn. That's what sailors tended to seem to dream of. Very few of them dreamed of becoming farmers or anything like that, but a lot of them seemed to dream of setting up their own tavern. I suppose they've never seen a poor publican. From a sailor's perspective. But Quiberon Bay. Battle of Quiberon Bay. Hawke and the Defeat of the French Invasion by Nicholas Tracy. Very much worth a read. Hope you enjoy.